Presidential candidate Donald Trump backtracking, well, sort of, after a massive outcry over his endorsement of a national database to register and track every single Muslim living in the U.S. Hillary Clinton today calling Trump's rhetoric shocking and for it to be denounced by all seeking to lead this country. Representative Keith Ellison, the first Muslim American elected to Congress, also decrying Trump's stance and not sparing Trump's fellow GOP candidates.
Not all of the Republican candidates, but certainly some of them seem to think anti-Muslim hate is advantageous politically. And I would call on everyone to, adhere to our constitutional values, which say we are a religiously tolerant country. We're not like ISIS. We're different from them. We believe Muslim, Christian, Jew, Hindu, no faith at all. It's all American. It's okay.
Even Ted Cruz and Ben Carson themselves no strangers to inflammatory rhetoric, suggesting that possibly Trump had gone too far.
Listen, I'm a big fan of Donald Trump's, but I'm not a fan of government registries of American citizens.
So if we're just going to pick out a particular group of people based on their religion, based on their race, based on some other thing, that's setting a pretty dangerous precedent.
Criticism also came from two of the candidates seeking to cast themselves as the responsible adults in the GOP race, Jeb Bush and John Kasich, who took direct shots at the frontrunner.
He's engaged in personal attacks against me, and all I'm pointing out is the idea that, that somehow we're going to have all the Muslims in America register, which really strikes against, sort of the culture of America.
I find it abhorrent that Donald Trump is suggesting we register people. That haunts back to a time that no one wants to go back to. You talk about closing mosques, you talk about registering people, and that's just wrong. I don't care about campaigns.
Asked about Trump's call to close down some mosques on Fox News last night, Marco Rubio seemed to want to take a more moderate position, but he ended up calling for something much more expansive.
It's not about closing down mosques. It's about closing down any place, whether it's a cafe, a diner, an internet site, any place where radicals are being inspired. Whatever facility is being used, it's not just a mosque, but any facility that's being used to radicalize and inspire attacks against the United States should be a place that we look at.
Some serious First Amendment problems there. As I mentioned at the outset, Trump did seem to sort of walk back his position today, though he didn't quite repudiate it. Tweeting, quote, "I didn't suggest a database, a reporter did," and then suggesting he wants a, quote, "watch list to protect America," which he may be offering as an alternative to the database. We reached out to the campaign for clarification, but got no response. It is true that Yahoo News reporter Hunter Walker did ask Trump whether his policies might require registering Muslims in a database, which prompted Trump to respond, quote, "We're going to have to look at a lot of things very closely." But Trump left no doubt as to his stance on a Muslim registry in a follow-up interview with NBC News last night.
Should there be a database system that tracks the Muslims here in this country?
There should be a lot of systems beyond database. I mean, we should have a lot of systems. And today you can do it. But right now we have to have a border, we have to have strength, we have to have a wall, and we cannot let what's happening to this country happen.
But that's something your White House would like to implement.
Oh, I would certainly implement that. Absolutely.
All right, joining me now, Yahoo News national correspondent Hunter Walker, the person who kicked all this off by asking Trump if he supported a database to track Muslims. And Hunter, the case I've seen being made today, but from some of the conservative media and some Trump supporters, is that he was essentially entrapped into this position by you, that it was never interjected in the debate until you brought it up. Is that fair?
Well, let's be very clear about the context in which this exchange happened. We began by discussing Trump's past expressions of support for the NYPD's Muslim surveillance program, which was ended earlier this year. Early 2014. And, that was a situation where the NYPD was conducting surveillance of the Muslim community in the U.S., infiltrating mosques, infiltrating student groups in the New York area. So I brought that up. Mr. Trump did not deny his past expressions of support for it, and even said he would consider former NYPD Commissioner Ray Kelly for a position in his administration. So then I followed up further and asked his take on the Syrian refugee situation, and I noted that in Paris they've declared a state of emergency that has included warrantless searches, increased warrantless searches. So given that Mr. Trump was talking about extensive surveillance on the Muslim community in the U.S., I asked whether that would include warrantless searches. And his response basically indicated that he would rule nothing out. He said we should be doing some things that are, quote unquote, frankly unthinkable by past standards and would make some people upset. So again, I pressed for specifics and said, would that level of tracking require a database of Muslim citizens or special notations on their ID? And he said that quote you highlighted before. We're going to have to look at a lot of things very closely. So all we did was press him for specifics when he was talking about wanting an unprecedented surveillance program on, again, Muslims in America, not immigrants, not refugees. And we pressed him for specifics and said he didn't rule anything out. And that's what happened.
We should also note, of course, that he essentially seemed to confirm that in a later interview. So if he's essentially being bullied into this by the press, he has been twice so bullied, and I don't think Donald Trump is someone who's easily bullied, as he will tell you himself. The other thing about this is that it really does seem like this, you keep looking for some sort of tipping point in rhetoric. There was a little bit of that, it appeared, with Jeb Bush and John Kasich, but you know, frankly, even the Ted Cruz and Ben Carson distancing was not particularly strenuous.
Right, and as you pointed out, you know, Mr. Trump has sort of walked this back by saying that the suggestion came from reporters, but at no point in any of his multiple personal comments about this has he said, I do not support this type of database, or I do not support an ID. So even if this suggestion was presented by reporters, which it initially was, he's never, ever said he's against it. And his spokesperson, Katrina Pearson, also gave an appearance on Fox Business where she said they're not ruling anything out. So sure, this was initially presented by me, but it was in a context where he was talking about this mass surveillance program that he wants. I think it's important to press for specifics. And when I did, he hasn't said whether or not he's against this.
I also just want to flag what Marco Rubio said, because in some ways that was the strangest response all day. I mean, he basically says, yeah, we should be looking into shutting down anything, diners, restaurants, websites, where people are getting radicalized. You know, A, I don't know what diners he's talking about, and B, you run up pretty hard against the First Amendment when you start talking about that.
Well, absolutely, and I think you were alluding to this before. We're in this environment of inflamed rhetoric, and I think it's really important to talk about specifics and logistics. If we're talking about a mass security system against the Muslim community in the U.S., what does that look like, and does that really fit with our ideals?
All right, Hunter Walker, thank you very much. That was very clear. Less than a week after the United States was attacked on September 11, 2001, President George Bush did something that, given the current climate, seems absolutely extraordinary. He went to speak at the Islamic Center of Washington, D.C. to condemn the intimidation of Muslims and bigoted rhetoric about them, and to declare the United States was not at war with Islam.
Thank you all very much for your hospitality. We've just had a wide-ranging discussions on the matter at hand. Like the good folks standing with me, the American people were appalled and outraged at last Tuesday's attacks, and so were Muslims all across the world. Both Americans, our Muslim friends and citizens, tax-paying citizens, and Muslims in nations were just appalled and could not believe what we saw on our TV screens. These acts of violence against innocents violate the fundamental tenets of the Islamic faith. And it's important for my fellow Americans to understand that. The English translation is not as eloquent as the original Arabic, but let me quote from the Quran itself. In the long run, evil in the extreme will be the end of those who do evil. For that they rejected the signs of Allah and held them up to ridicule. The face of terror is not the true faith of Islam. That's not what Islam is all about. Islam is peace. These terrorists don't represent peace. They represent evil and war. When we think of Islam, we think of a faith that brings comfort to 1 billion people around the world. Billions of people find comfort and solace and peace. And that's made brothers and sisters out of every race. Out of every race. America counts millions of Muslims amongst our citizens. And Muslims make an incredibly valuable contribution to our country. Muslims are doctors, lawyers, law professors, members of the military, entrepreneurs, shopkeepers, moms and dads, and they need to be treated with respect. In our anger and emotion, our fellow Americans must treat each other with respect. Women who cover their heads in this country must feel comfortable going outside their homes. Moms who wear cover must not be intimidated in America. That's not the America I know. That's not the America I value. I've been told that some fear to leave. Some don't want to go shopping for their families. Some don't want to go about their ordinary daily routines because by wearing cover they're afraid they'll be intimidated. That should not and that will not stand in America. Those who feel like they can intimidate our fellow citizens to take out their anger don't represent the best of America. They represent the worst of humankind, and they should be ashamed of that kind of behavior. Now, this is a great country. It's a great country because we share the same values of respect and dignity and human worth. And it is my honor to be meeting with leaders who feel just the same way I do. They're outraged, they're sad, they love America just as much as I do. And I want to thank you all for giving me a chance to come by